Are your cortisol-lowering supplements making things worse? They could be, especially if you have chronic inflammation, too much body fat, or fatigue. If this is you, keep watching because in this video, you'll discover how to know for sure what your cortisol levels are and the best functional medicine strategies to address high and low cortisol naturally. I've been helping folks get to the root of their cortisol problems for 15 plus years now, and I see this problem come up over and over again. It's not that folks don't know that they have a cortisol issue. They're not in denial about their chronic stress, and they're not unwilling to make changes to their diet and lifestyle. Most of the time, they're actively trying to regulate their cortisol with supplements like ashwagandha, magnesium, or L-theanine, but they're still stuck. The problem is about as simple as it is common, and it boils down to this. If you're actively treating high cortisol, but you actually have low cortisol instead, you're making things worse. And the same thing happens in reverse. It's not your fault. Everybody is talking about high cortisol these days. It gets blamed for everything from round facial features, to excessive sweating, to weight gain. As of my last check, there are over 1.1 million videos on YouTube about high cortisol. It makes sense. Because high cortisol is associated with stress, and the vast majority of people have busy, overwhelming, stressful lives, it's understandable that you would assume your symptoms are being caused by too much cortisol, especially issues like weight loss resistance, fatigue, thyroid problems, brain fog, anxiety, bloating, and constipation, just to name a few. And yes, high cortisol is a problem, but we can't stop the conversation there because eventually, too high cortisol turns into too low cortisol. When your HPA axis is cranking out lots and lots of cortisol for a long time, your cells adapt to those high levels by decreasing their sensitivity to cortisol. Here's an analogy I find helpful. My sister has 4 delightful, energetic children, and those children make a lot of noise. Someone is always shouting or crying or laughing or singing at the top of her lungs. And when I visit my sister's house, I'm very sensitive and responsive to all of those sounds. I'm distracted and I startle easily. My sister, on the other hand, has adapted to all of this noise and has much less reactivity to it. It's not that she doesn't hear her children and she's not ignoring them. She's just responding more appropriately to the constant noise because it's her typical environment. It wouldn't be helpful for her to react with alarm or loss of focus every time someone in her house bursts into song. She'd never get anything done. Same thing goes for your cells when they're overexposed to cortisol. They turn down their responsivity little by little over time until the brain turns down its signal to release more cortisol and levels drop off and flatten out. We refer to this as adrenal fatigue or burnout, and it can result in symptoms like exhaustion, weight gain, gastrointestinal issues like constipation and bloating, hormone imbalances, hair loss and thinning, brain fog, depression, and even orthostatic hypotension, which can make you lightheaded or feel dizzy. You might recognize these symptoms because they can also be signs of high cortisol. High or low cortisol could be why you wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding and mind racing, even if you're not feeling stressed. It could be why you've been unable to lose that 20 pounds, even though you changed your diet and are working out. It's probably impacting your brain power, making you feel forgetful or foggy or unfocused. You can't rely on symptoms alone to figure out if you're high or low because they overlap. Imagine if someone with weight loss resistance assumed that they have high cortisol, even though it was actually low, and they started taking supplements to lower it. I see it all the time, and I can tell you that it's very possible to make things worse if you don't really know what your cortisol is doing. How can you know for sure if your cortisol is too high or too low? Well, if you're lucky enough to have a doctor who will test your cortisol levels, they will most likely order a blood test for cortisol. This is the least helpful cortisol test. It only measures free cortisol, and free cortisol rises and falls significantly depending on your sleep-wake cycle. Free cortisol starts out relatively low when you first wake up, then rises sharply, and then tails off slowly over the course of the day to become low again in the evening. A single blood test at a random time of day does not take any of this into account and will most likely come back as normal unless you have a rare and complicated disease like Addison's or Cushing's. While it's good to rule out these conditions, getting a normal test result for cortisol when you're definitely not feeling normal can be discouraging, frustrating, and leave you without a solid plan for addressing your symptoms. You might be thinking, well, Dr. Kate, I did a salivary cortisol test, so I know for sure that my cortisol is high or low. Well, you'd be right in that you know if your free cortisol is high or low, but what about your overall cortisol production? A salivary test is like a snapshot. It measures your levels of free cortisol at the moment you spit into that vial. And it's great that most salivary tests utilize multiple timed collections to establish your cortisol pattern or curve. This can be very useful. But what about all of the cortisol that your body is breaking down in your tissues? The cortisol that's being metabolized or cleared out of the bloodstream? That doesn't get measured in a saliva test. And neither does free cortisone, which is inactivated cortisol. Assessing your cortisol via saliva is like taking 4 to 6 photographs of a film screen while it's playing and expecting to understand the whole plot of the movie. The best, most efficient way to measure cortisol is via urine, specifically via the Dutch adrenal test. Here's why. When the adrenal glands make cortisol, it's released into the bloodstream as free cortisol. And like we talked about, free cortisol levels rise and fall at different parts of the day and night. But free cortisol can also be interconverted to free cortisone. And a lot of factors impact how much free cortisol versus free cortisone your body has hanging around. Free cortisol can also be metabolized or cleared out of the body via the urine. Metabolized cortisol is often a good measurement of total cortisol production, depending on something called your cortisol clearance rate. This is another crucial cortisol measurement that you get with dried urine testing. When you compare how much cortisol has been metabolized or cleared to the amount of free cortisol and cortisone in your body, you get the cortisol clearance rate, which you can see on the Dutch test as a slider bar. If the slider bar is further to the right, it means cortisol clearance is happening faster. If it's further to the left, it means the clearance rate is lower or happening more slowly. Many things can cause a slow cortisol clearance rate, including low ferritin, hypothyroidism, liver disease, and mitochondrial dysfunction. What does this mean for free cortisol levels? Well, if cortisol isn't being metabolized or cleared fast enough, you may see higher free cortisol levels, even if your total cortisol production is low. And you can still have the symptoms of too much cortisol production due to free cortisol levels being elevated. But if you assume your overall cortisol levels are high and you start trying to lower them, you could create more problems than you solve. This is why I always recommend the Dutch test as step number 1 to sorting out cortisol problems. There's just too much that you can miss with a blood or saliva test. Not only does it give you the most data, but that data is actionable and leads to the best outcomes. While your doctor has probably never heard of the Dutch test, the good news is that we help people all over the world get access to the Dutch test for cortisol with my Cortisol Confidence Fast Track. And as part of the testing bundle, I'll walk you through your results line by line and recommend diet and lifestyle strategies, as well as practitioner-grade supplements that fit your unique needs. If you're ready to finally get some answers about your cortisol, ones that will actually move the needle and help you feel like yourself again, I'd strongly recommend the Cortisol Confidence Fast Track. I'll put a link in the video description so that you can learn more and get signed up for the best, most comprehensive, most actionable cortisol test right now. So once you figure out if your cortisol is too high or too low, the next step is to choose root cause strategies to help your body regulate your levels and return to homeostasis. Here are just a few of my go-to functional medicine suggestions for raising low cortisol levels. And don't worry, I'll cover lowering high levels next. Seeking out and addressing sources of unresolved stress in the body and the mind is a critical component of reviving a burned-out HPA axis. And meaningful results-oriented stress management isn't as easy as drawing yourself a bubble bath and pouring a big glass of wine. It's usually hard work and requires both consistency and intention. But working on the root cause of your stress takes energy, and it's tough to do when you're already feeling so tired and foggy. That's why I often suggest utilizing some pro-cortisol nutraceuticals to help boost energy while you're getting to the underlying issues. First on the list are adrenal glandular extracts, which help rebuild and refuel the adrenal cells that are needed to produce cortisol. Because these glandular extracts come from the tissues of animals, clean, non-toxic sourcing is really, really important, as is the way these extracts are processed, because high temperatures can denature the critical components of the extract. I've typed up some additional tips and tricks about my 3 favorite cortisol-supportive nutraceuticals, including glandulars, into a handy PDF for you. You're welcome to download it for free using the link I've put in the video description. And as a bonus, you'll also find a link to purchase my suggested supports at a really nice discount, like really nice. Second is licorice root extract, specifically glyceric acid, which acts by helping your body reactivate inactive cortisone into free cortisol, supporting higher circulating activated cortisol levels and boosting energy. Because licorice extract stimulates cortisol, it can also raise your blood pressure. My clients with POTS actually find it really helpful for this reason. So it's important to monitor blood pressure while taking licorice root extract. And if you already have high blood pressure or are taking medication to treat high blood pressure, licorice root is not for you. Third on the list is diindolyl methane, or DIM. In a pilot study, just 108 milligrams of DIM taken once a day for 30 days significantly increased urinary free cortisol in postmenopausal women. Again, you'll find my favorite DIM product for raising cortisol in the free PDF. What if you have high cortisol and you need quick symptom relief that also allows you to stay functional and keep going in the face of continued chronic stress? Here are 3 evidence-based strategies you can take advantage of and specific supports you can use to shift your stress response by lowering cortisol levels strategically and intentionally. Strategy number 1 is to increase the uptake of cortisol into your cells. This helps lower free cortisol concentration in the blood, calming anxiety, panic, and fear without sedating you or dulling your brain function. I like to think of this strategy as lowering stress hormone overload. One of my favorite tools for increasing cortisol uptake and breaking the cycle of cortisol overload is a unique peptide called lactium. This protein is derived from milk, specifically cow's milk, that is filtered and concentrated to remove other milk ingredients and proteins. Because it's food-based, it's remarkably gentle and safe, yet super effective. One clinical trial found that 150 milligrams of this peptide lowered cortisol by 20% in just 5 minutes. Talk about a fast response. Another trial found that it significantly reduced symptoms associated with high cortisol, including mental and emotional symptoms, as well as digestive, making it a great option if you get an upset stomach or diarrhea when you're stressed. Because the lactium is isolated from the rest of the milk proteins and fats, there's no need to be afraid of this ingredient if you're lactose intolerant. Only those with true milk allergies need to avoid this peptide. I even suggest it for children who have trouble regulating their thoughts and emotions in stressful situations. I'll put details about the specific lactium product that I like in the video description. Strategy number 2 is to normalize HPA axis function and build stress resilience using adaptogenic herbs. 3 of my favorite adaptogenic herbs for lowering cortisol are ashwagandha, holy basil, and bacopa. You've probably heard of ashwagandha before. It has lots of studies on lowering anxiety, calming the brain, normalizing cortisol, and boosting brain function in the face of stress. Holy basil is another adaptogenic herb with normalizing impacts on the central nervous system. It also helps lower blood sugar levels, which is important because high cortisol causes insulin resistance, which raises blood sugar, causing an increase in body fat and inflammation. Bacopa also works on memory processing and cognition and is a powerful antioxidant, protecting sensitive cells from inflammatory damage, which is one of the most common causes of chronic stress and cortisol dysregulation. You'll find details about my favorite blend of these adaptogens in that free download, as well as the link where you can order some to try. Strategy number 3 is to regulate your circadian rhythm with healthy, restful sleep. I've noticed that sleep issues are one of the early indicators of high cortisol in my clients, particularly trouble falling asleep even though you're exhausted, or waking up between 2 and 4 a.m., wide awake for no reason, and struggling to fall back to sleep. Some of my favorite strategies for promoting healthy circadian rhythm fall under the category of sleep hygiene, including habits like avoiding screen exposure for an hour before bed. By the way, that includes your phone screen. Making sure the room you sleep in is as dark as possible, especially avoiding blue light, is another way to improve your sleep hygiene. Natural light exposure within 20 minutes of waking up in the morning is another evidence-based way to improve your circadian rhythm. My favorite sleep support nutraceutical focuses more on lowering cortisol specifically than sedating you to sleep. It includes ashwagandha, L-theanine, magnolia, and phosphatidylcholine to calm the mind and lower cortisol quickly. It helps you fall asleep faster and stay asleep, and it's not habit-forming, so you can safely take it every night. Again, check the free download that I've linked to in the video description for more info and a link to order these cortisol-lowering products at a nice discount. If you happen to be looking for more strategies to regulate cortisol, check out the Stress Smarter mini workshop. It's an exclusive webinar for my channel members all about how to keep going and stay healthy during times of stress. If you're not a member yet, just tap the Join button and get instant access to my exclusive video library, including the Stress Smarter mini workshop, for just $7.99. Thanks so much for watching, for supporting my channel with your likes and subscribes, and for spreading the word about the work I'm doing. I appreciate it more than you know. Be sure to check out the links in the video description for all the free resources and discounts that I mentioned in the video, including the Cortisol Confidence Fast Track. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next video.